The message came through just after midnight, its coldness sharper than the Nevada desert night. I've made my decision. The family isn't my priority anymore. The wealth is. I'm done. Those words sent by my husband Mark shattered the fragile calm I'd been clinging to for weeks. I sat on the edge of our bed, the phone trembling in my hand, as the silence of the room pressed in around me. 35 years of marriage, 3 children raised, and countless memories, reduced to a few lines of text that left me feeling invisible. Mark had never been a man of many words, but this message was something else entirely. It wasn't just the abruptness, it was the cold dismissal of everything we had built together. I remembered the early days when our love was like a wildfire, fierce and consuming. We were young, full of dreams and hope, ready to face the world side by side. Nevada was our home then, its endless skies and rugged mountains a backdrop to our life story. I had stood by Mark through thick and thin. When he lost his job during the recession, I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, working nights so our children would never know the weight of our struggles. I managed the bills, the school events, the countless little things that kept our family running. I believed in us, in the life we were creating. Mark's ambition was relentless, and I was proud of his drive. But somewhere along the way, that drive had turned into an obsession, one that left little room for the family he once vowed to cherish. In recent years, his focus had shifted entirely to his business ventures. Late nights turned into early mornings, and weekends were swallowed by meetings and travel. I became a ghost in our own home, a spectator to the man I'd married. When I tried to reach out to share my fears and loneliness, I was met with impatience or silence. The warmth between us cooled, replaced by a distance that felt like an unbridgeable chasm. That message was the culmination of months of growing apart. Mark's newfound wealth, the success he'd chased so relentlessly, had become his sole priority. The family, our children, even me, none of it mattered anymore. I thought I knew the man I married, but now I wasn't sure if I recognized him at all. I spent that night awake, memories flooding my mind like a relentless tide. I recalled the sacrifices I had made, not just the sleepless nights or the endless errands, but the dreams I quietly set aside to support his ambitions. I had believed that together we could weather any storm, but now it felt like I had been holding on to a mirage. When the sun rose, I was still sitting in the same spot, the weight of betrayal heavy on my chest. Our children were still asleep, unaware of the fracture growing in their parents' world. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I gathered myself and prepared to face a day that would change everything. Mark was already gone when the house stirred with life. His car was missing from the driveway, and a note lay on the kitchen counter, brief and impersonal. "I'm focusing on what matters now. Don't wait for me." It was as if he had vanished into the very wealth he sought, leaving behind a family he no longer cared to protect. I looked around our home, the walls lined with photographs of birthdays, graduations, and family vacations. They were snapshots of a life that now felt fragile and uncertain. I had built this family with love and loyalty, standing as the anchor through every hardship. But anchors don't hold when the ship's captain abandons the helm. The children woke, sensing the tension before I could explain. Their eyes searched mine, looking for reassurance I struggled to give. I forced a smile, masking the storm raging inside. "Your father is busy right now," I said softly, hoping the words would be enough. But I knew the truth was far more complicated. Mark's choice wasn't just about business or ambition. It was a rejection of the life we had shared, a betrayal of the vows we made. The man who once promised to stand by me through sickness and health had chosen a different path, one paved with dollars and cold ambition. As the day unfolded, I found myself walking through the house like a stranger. The rooms echoed with memories, each corner a reminder of what was slipping away. I thought about the years of loyalty I had poured into our marriage, the nights I stayed awake worrying about our children's futures, the sacrifices made in silence. It was hard to reconcile the man I loved with the one who sent that message. Mark's eyes, once warm and familiar, now seemed distant and guarded. His smile, which used to light up a room, had faded into something unrecognizable. I realized then that the rift between us was more than emotional. It was a chasm carved by choices and priorities that no amount of pleading could bridge. The husband who had once held my hand through every storm had turned away, chasing a dream that left the rest of us behind. But even as the hurt settled deep inside me, A flicker of resolve sparked. I had spent decades standing by him, believing that love and commitment could weather any storm. Now, faced with abandonment and betrayal, I knew I had to find strength not just for myself but for our children. The weight of loyalty felt both like a burden and a shield. I was determined not to let Mark's decision define us or fracture the family we had built together. I needed to hold on to the pieces of our life that still mattered. The laughter of our children, the memories that no wealth could buy, and the love that had once bound us. That morning, as the Nevada sun cast long shadows across our home, I made a silent promise. I would face whatever came next with courage and grace. Mark might have chosen wealth over family, but I was not done fighting for the life and love we had shared. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew this was just the beginning of a journey I never expected to take alone. The man I had stood beside for so many years had stepped into a new world, one where I was no longer a part of his story. But I was still here, still standing, and still holding on to the hope that destiny had more in store for us all. The days that followed Mark's cold departure felt like a slow unraveling. Each morning I woke with a hollow ache, the silence in our home a stark reminder of the man who had chosen wealth over us. I found myself wandering through memories, the weight of betrayal pressing down heavier than I could have imagined. How had it come to this? How had the man I loved so fiercely turned his back on everything we built together? I kept replaying our years side by side, the resilience it took to keep our family afloat through every storm. I remembered the nights I sat by the kitchen table, bills spread out like a puzzle I was desperate to solve. When Mark's job disappeared during the economic crash, I didn't hesitate. I took on extra shifts at the hospital, working through exhaustion so our children would never question the stability of their world. I was the quiet backbone, the steady hand that held us all together. Our children, Emily, James, and little Sophie, were still young when the financial crisis hit. I can still see Emily's worried face when I came home late, the exhaustion in James's eyes as he balanced school and part-time work. Mark was struggling too, but I always believed we were a team. I thought that was what marriage meant, standing shoulder to shoulder no matter how fierce the gale. But in recent years Mark had changed. The man who once stayed up late talking about our future now disappeared into boardrooms and business deals. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by a cold ambition that left no room for family dinners or weekend trips. I tried to speak to him, to share my fears and loneliness, but he brushed me off with a distracted nod or a forced smile. The distance between us grew, a chasm widened by his relentless pursuit of success. I saw the strain it put on our children too. Emily, once bubbly and outgoing, had grown quiet, retreating into herself. James, always the protector, took on more responsibility at home, trying to fill the gap left by Mark's absence. Sophie, still young, asked questions I wasn't sure how to answer. "Why doesn't Dad come home anymore?" she'd whisper, eyes wide and searching. One evening I found Emily sitting alone in her room, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Mom, I miss Dad," she said, her voice breaking. "But it's like he doesn't want to be here anymore." I held her close, my own heart breaking in silence. How could I explain that sometimes, the people we love get lost in their own dreams and forget the ones waiting for them at home? Mark's behavior grew more selfish with each passing day. He became impatient, snapping at the smallest inconvenience. Family gatherings became tense, conversations forced and hollow. I watched helplessly as my husband, the man I had once admired for his kindness and strength, transformed into someone I barely recognized. The house felt colder, emptier. I was left to pick up the pieces, to shield our children from the storm brewing beneath the surface. I wondered if Mark even realized the toll his choices were taking, not just on me but on the family we had vowed to protect. I tried to hold on to hope, convincing myself that this was just a rough patch, that Mark would come back to us once the business settled. But deep down I feared the truth, that he had already made his choice, and we were no longer part of his vision. One afternoon, as I sat alone in the living room, the weight of it all pressing down, the phone rang. It was Mark. His voice was distant, almost mechanical. "I'm busy," he said abruptly, then hung up. No explanation, no apology, just a cold reminder that he had moved on to something far beyond our family. That call broke something inside me. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for a man who had chosen a different path. I had to find a way to keep going, for the sake of our children and myself. But the heartbreak was suffocating. A deep wound that no amount of time seemed to heal. I thought about the sacrifices I had made. Putting my own dreams aside to support Mark's ambitions, standing by him through every hardship, holding the family together when everything else was falling apart. It felt like those sacrifices didn't matter anymore. Like they had been invisible to the man I loved. Yet amidst the pain, a quiet strength began to grow inside me. I refused to let Mark's coldness define me or our children. I started reaching out to friends, leaning on the support I had once been too proud to seek. I picked up the pieces of our family life, trying to fill the void Mark's absence left behind. There were days when the loneliness overwhelmed me, when I questioned whether I could carry this burden alone. But I reminded myself of the resilience that had carried me through so many storms before. I was a mother, a wife, a woman who had endured. I would not let this be the end of our story. I found solace in small moments, the laughter of Sophie playing in the backyard, James helping with dinner, Emily sharing a quiet conversation over tea. These fragments of normalcy became my anchor, proof that life could still hold beauty even in the darkest times. But beneath it all, the tension simmered. Mark's absence was not just physical. It was a wound that threatened to tear the family apart. The children struggled with their own feelings of loss and confusion, and I bore the weight of holding us together, even as my own heart broke in silence. I wondered how we had come to this. A family fractured by ambition and neglect, struggling to find its way back. The man I had loved with all my heart had become a stranger. His priorities shifted so drastically that I barely recognized him. Still, I held on to a fragile hope. Perhaps someday Mark would see what he had lost. Perhaps the wealth he chased would not bring the happiness he sought. Perhaps, despite everything, we could find a way back to each other. Until then, I would keep fighting, not just for myself but for the family that still needed me. I had learned that loyalty was not blind obedience, but a fierce commitment to love, even when it was hard. And love, I believed, could endure even the coldest betrayals. As the days stretched on, I made a silent vow to myself, to protect my children, to keep our home a place of warmth and safety, and to find my own strength in the face of heartbreak. Mark's choices had changed everything, but they would not break me. I was learning slowly and painfully that sometimes resilience was about letting go of what you once believed and embracing the uncertain path ahead. The road would be long and lonely, but I was determined to walk it with my head held high, for the sake of the family I had fought so hard to keep together. The morning the news broke, I was sitting at the kitchen table sipping my coffee, when the phone rang with urgency I hadn't heard in months. Mark's financial empire, the very one he had built his new life upon, was crumbling. Reports of market failures, betrayal by business partners, and a cascade of bad investments were unraveling everything he had fought so hard to achieve. I felt a strange mix of emotions: shock, disbelief, and a surprising undercurrent of relief. For so long, his wealth had been a wedge between us, a barrier that separated him from the family we once were. Now that barrier was collapsing, exposing the man beneath the fortune to the harsh light of reality. It wasn't long before the media caught wind of the story. Headlines screamed of bankruptcy, scandal, and a fallen titan brought low by greed and miscalculation. Mark, once untouchable in his success, was now vulnerable and exposed. The man who had turned away from his family was suddenly stripped of the armor his wealth had provided. I watched at a distance as the public spectacle unfolded. There was a gnawing sadness in seeing him humbled, but also a quiet hope that this might be the moment he finally faced the truth about what truly mattered. When Mark called that afternoon, his voice was different, strained, vulnerable, and tinged with regret. "I made mistakes," he admitted quietly. "I lost sight of what was important." For the first time in months, I saw the man I had married, the man who had once held my hand and promised forever. The man who had been lost in the pursuit of fortune was re-emerging, stripped of pretense and pride. I listened as he poured out his fears, his remorse, and his desire to make amends. It wasn't easy to hear, nor was it easy to forgive, but I recognized the courage it took for him to reach out. In that moment, the years of pain and distance felt less like a chasm and more like a bridge, fragile but real. I knew that rebuilding trust would be a long journey, but the first step had been taken. I decided to meet him, not as the hurt wife, but as the woman who still believed in the power of forgiveness and second chances. When we sat face to face, the walls between us began to crumble. Mark was different. Humbled, reflective, and willing to confront the consequences of his choices. The empire he had built was gone, but perhaps what remained was something far more valuable. The chance to rebuild our family from the ground up. I offered him forgiveness, not as a gift lightly given, but as a lifeline extended to a man drowning in his own mistakes. It was a choice born of love and resilience, a declaration that despite everything, our bond could endure. The days that followed were filled with difficult conversations, tears, and tentative steps toward healing. Mark faced the reality of his loss with a newfound humility, and I stood by him, not as a silent supporter, but as an equal partner determined to rediscover the life we had lost. Our children watched cautiously, their own wounds raw but hopeful. Together we navigated the uncertain terrain of rebuilding, not just our finances, but the trust and love that had once defined us. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of the past threatened to pull us under, when old resentments bubbled to the surface. But with each challenge we chose to face it together, learning that true strength lay not in wealth or success, but in the ties that bound us through adversity. Mark's fall from grace was a harsh lesson, but it was also a turning point, a chance to realign priorities and rediscover what truly mattered. The emptiness of wealth without family became painfully clear to him, and it was a revelation that changed everything. As we began to rebuild, I found a new sense of purpose. My loyalty and love had never wavered, but now they were joined by a quiet strength born from the trials we had endured. I saw in Mark a man willing to fight, not for fortune, but for forgiveness and family. Our journey was far from over, but that moment, the moment he reached out, humbled and sincere, marked the beginning of a new chapter. Destiny had intervened, forcing us to confront the fragile nature of success and the enduring power of love. I held on to that hope, knowing that while the road ahead would be difficult, it was also filled with the possibility of redemption and healing. Mark's empire may have fallen, but our family had a chance to rise from the ashes, stronger and more united than ever before. The days that followed Mark's admission felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm of uncertainty. The financial ruin had stripped away the veneer of success, but it also peeled back years of silence between us, exposing raw wounds and fragile hopes. We were no longer the untouchable power couple the world had admired. We were two people trying to piece together a shattered life. Reconciliation was not a swift or easy path. Mark's fall from grace had left scars deeper than the loss of money. He wrestled with humiliation, guilt, and a profound sense of failure. I saw the man who had once chased fortune now humbled, struggling to find his place in a family he had neglected. But beneath the weight of his regret, I sensed a genuine desire to make things right. Our children, too, bore the brunt of the upheaval. Emily's guarded smiles slowly gave way to cautious warmth. James, ever the protector, began to lower his defenses. Even little Sophie, whose innocence shielded her from the worst, sensed the shift in the house. The tension that had filled our home started to dissipate, replaced by tentative moments of laughter and shared memories. I became the steady anchor in this storm. My role transcended the silent supporter I had been. I was now a beacon of hope and healing. Each day I met Mark's efforts to rebuild with patience and grace, knowing that trust, once broken, needed time and consistency to mend. Financial hardship was a new reality we faced together. The luxuries we once took for granted vanished overnight. There were bills to be paid, debts to manage, and a future to reimagine. The social circles that had once celebrated Mark's success turned cold, their judgment palpable. Yet, in the midst of this adversity, our family found unexpected strength. Mark learned humility in its purest form. The lessons were harsh but necessary. He began to understand that true wealth was not measured by bank accounts or titles, but by the love and loyalty of those who stood beside him through the darkest times. His priorities shifted, and slowly, he started to reclaim the husband and father he had abandoned. There were difficult conversations, sometimes heated, often painful. We confronted the mistakes, the betrayals, and the silence that had driven us apart. But with every honest exchange, the walls between us crumbled a little more. Forgiveness was not a one-time gift but a daily choice we made for each other, and for our family. I saw Mark embracing vulnerability in ways he never had before. He attended school events, helped with Sophie's homework, and made time for dinners that weren't interrupted by phone calls or business. These small acts were monumental, signaling a man relearning how to be present. Our children, too, began to heal. Emily's laughter returned, genuine and unguarded. James found solace in family dinners and late-night talks. Sophie blossomed in the warmth that returned to our home. The fractures that had threatened to break us were slowly knitting together, stronger for the struggle. Outside, the world still whispered judgments. Friends turned away, business contacts vanished, and the social status we once held became a distant memory. But inside our home, a new foundation was being laid, one built on resilience, humility, and the unwavering bond of family. I often reflected on the journey that brought us here. The sacrifices I had made, the loneliness I endured, and the heartbreak of betrayal were all part of a story that was far from over. But in this chapter, I found a renewed sense of purpose and strength. Mark's fall had been devastating, but it was also a catalyst for transformation. He was no longer the man who valued wealth above all else. He was becoming the husband and father we needed him to be. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with challenges we could not yet foresee. Yet, the hardest lessons had been learned. We had faced loss, humiliation, and fractured trust, and emerged with a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. Love, loyalty, and forgiveness had become the pillars upon which we would rebuild. Together, we navigated the complexities of our new life. Bills were paid one at a time, apologies were offered and accepted, and moments of joy were savored like precious gems. The journey was far from easy, but it was real and honest. In the quiet moments when the day's struggles settled, I would catch Mark watching our children with a soft smile, a man rediscovering the treasures he nearly lost. And I would remind myself that this was the true wealth, the legacy worth fighting for. We were no longer defined by money or status, but by the resilience and love that carried us through the darkest days. Our family, once fractured and distant, was healing slowly, imperfectly but surely. The path to forgiveness and renewal was winding and steep, but with each step we moved closer to the life we had dreamed of in those early years. One where love and loyalty outshone any fortune. Mark's humility became a lesson for us all. It taught us that success without family is hollow, and that the true measure of a man lies in his willingness to confront his failures and make amends. I stood beside him, not as the woman who had been left behind, but as a partner ready to rebuild, to forgive, and to find hope amid the ruins. Our family was beginning to breathe again, bound not by wealth, but by the enduring strength of connection. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. We were no longer defined by what we had lost, but by what we were willing to fight for. A future forged in resilience, love, and the promise of second chances. The years that followed were a testament to the power of resilience, and the quiet strength born from hardship. Mark and I rebuilt our lives. Not in the grand mansions or boardrooms he once frequented, but within the walls of a home filled with renewed love, respect, and understanding. The scars of our past remained, but they were no longer wounds that divided us. They had become reminders of our journey, of the battles fought and the lessons learned. With every step we took together, we forged a partnership grounded in humility and mutual support. Mark had embraced a new perspective, one that valued family above all else. Gone were the endless hours consumed by business deals and the pursuit of wealth. Instead, he found joy in the simple moments. A shared meal, a child's laughter, an evening spent talking without distraction. Our children blossomed in this environment. Emily pursued her passions with confidence, her smile reflecting a healing heart. James grew into a man of integrity, shaped by the trials he had witnessed and the love that surrounded him. Sophie, still our little spark, thrived in the warmth that returned to our family. Together we created a new legacy, one not measured by fortune, but by the bonds that held us close. I often found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The loyalty and love that once felt unreciprocated had endured, transforming into a foundation stronger than I could have imagined. The sacrifices, the heartbreak, the moments of doubt, they all had a purpose. They had guided us back to what truly mattered. Mark and I learned that true wealth is not found in bank accounts or titles, but in the connections we nurture and the forgiveness we offer. Our story was no longer one of loss and betrayal but of renewal and hope. The community that had once turned its back slowly began to see the man Mark had become. He volunteered at local charities, supported our children's schools, and rebuilt friendships grounded in authenticity rather than status. It was a humbling and healing process, both for him and for those around us. I too found strength in sharing our story. It became a beacon for others facing similar trials, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is a path forward. The endurance of love and the power of forgiveness are forces capable of healing the deepest wounds. Our family bond, tested by fire, emerged stronger and more resilient. We faced judgment and hardship but chose to rise above them, united by a love that no crisis could sever. Looking back, I understood that destiny's hand had guided us through the upheaval, not to punish, but to realign our priorities and teach us the true meaning of wealth. The journey was painful, but it was also transformative. As Mark and I sat together one quiet evening, watching the sun set over the Nevada horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had weathered the storm, not by clinging to what was lost, but by embracing the possibilities ahead. Our story was far from perfect, but it was ours, marked by endurance, redemption, and the unwavering hope that love, above all, can heal even the deepest fractures. In the end, I realized that the greatest fortune lay not in riches, but in the resilience to forgive, the courage to rebuild, and the power of family to triumph over adversity.